What is the most intense revenge you've got on a family member? I completely ruined my aunt's life. 5 years ago, as my grandma was getting old, she had one wish: to not die in a senior home. Easily done, as my grandpa sold some assets way back when, then invested the money and let it ride for 30 plus years. He never touched it and collected a pension. Way back when my grandpa died, about 10 years before this, my grandma appointed my dad, this horrible aunt, and my uncle as the trustees of the trust. They were essentially the trusted advisors for her and her care for the foreseeable future. All was well in the beginning, then my dad Willie moved further away and couldn't take care of the day-to-day upkeep as the trustee, and seeing that my grandma was okay, my aunt Rebecca said that she and my uncle Fred, who lived in Arizona, could take over and all would be fine. Fine is quite the way to describe what happened. A few times my dad went back to visit and noticed some things were off. My grandma didn't always have overnight care, or her mail wasn't picked up and the driveway wasn't plowed. She also lost her cable TV and newspaper subscriptions. My dad figured it just lapsed, so he had the services put back on. My dad also noticed my grandma was eating moldy food because her truck was sold and she had no transportation. She basically just chilled at the house alone and did crossword puzzles all day long. On top of it all, my aunt only lived 2 miles from my grandma, but my grandma told my dad she saw Aunt Rebecca once every other week on Saturday for about 1 hour. After grandma passed, things started to get really interesting. As with the elderly and age, or moldy food, my grandma passed away. She did get her wish and was able to pass in her own home. Once the probate lawyer got her children, my dad, aunt, uncle and another estranged aunt, Becky, around the table, some shady business started to come out. My aunt Rebecca asked that everyone just forego any audit or paperwork and just sell the house, for around $400,000, and divide up the remaining bank account balance of roughly $400,000. So just signing on the line, each sibling was to get a check for $200,000, not too bad of an inheritance. Rightfully so, my dad thought that was somewhat a little rushed. He said at the time that he wanted to wait because my grandma's house was easily in the $600,000 range based on size and location. Rebecca did not handle this contradiction well. She exploded in his face, screaming all kinds of curses at him and calling him all kinds of names because he was unwilling to sign the assets then and there. She wanted a quick close while everyone looked the other way, and nobody could put a finger on why. My dad ended up leaving the room after the screaming, and the deal wasn't signed that day. It took nearly 6 months before another appointment, and they were all back at the table. Until everyone signed the final papers, all the money was essentially not accessible. At the next meeting, my dad went in there with no intention to sign the deal. He got my uncle Fred to agree that they audit the entire account going back 5 years. They demanded this again at the meeting with the lawyer. Rebecca got furious once again, yelling that a forensic audit would cost $5,000 and it was a huge waste. To her disappointment, with 2 beneficiaries requesting it, it was what was going to happen. The audit report showed up about 3 months later with some interesting information. Here is where it gets good. My dad began looking over the audit report, saw it was full of holes. Excessive monthly food costs for a 90-year-old lady, payments made for car services for a car my grandma no longer had, and many different things in there just didn't add up. My dad asked me to give the audit a second look, so I spent a Saturday night going over it, and here's the crazy stuff I found. A monthly Costco food cost of $2,100, $3,000 for the last 4 years. Telephone bills for 6 cell phones. Grandma had 1 home phone. Gasoline for a truck my grandma didn't have for like 4 years, and easily $500 per month. House repairs paid to my aunt's husband who owned a construction business. Some of the house repairs were like $16,000 for a new roof, new garage doors, home security system which she didn't have, etc. All inflated prices. Grandma paid for my aunt to go to Europe twice on vacation. My grandma was paying my estranged aunt Becky a stipend of $2,000 a month for the last 5 years, as well as her deadbeat son for $2,500. Every month they were paid. All grandkids were to be paid a lump sum of $10,000 upon their 30th birthday, as that is when the $50 check from grandma stopped for all grandkids. Guess who was paid out? Her kids and my estranged aunt's kids, but not me or my siblings. And finally, $300,000 of loans to Aunt Rebecca to trade for equity in her business. Armed with all this, the next probate meeting was going to be a war zone. In the time between my grandma's death and the 3rd probate meeting, my aunt's construction business filed for bankruptcy, so that $300,000 in equity grandma had simply vanished. After going through everything, the probate lawyer was somewhat concerned and made it obvious that this was a fraud and a breach of fiduciary duty, where my aunt could actually get real prison time. After this, the negotiations were much more favorable. My aunt got nothing, literally zero. But that's not even the best part. My father and uncle shared the rest, after all grandkids received the $10,000 payout. The house sold to the first offer for $520,000. My aunt probably felt pretty bad that she couldn't supplement her lifestyle with grandma's money anymore, but that was the least of her worries. Ripping off grandma and the whole family is one thing, but since she tried to personally rip me off for $10,000, I took it personally. I don't care how tough you are, the IRS is the scariest thing that can happen to a person. Nobody wants to have their money forcibly removed. I did a little research and found everything I needed. I photocopied my documents, had them notarized and sent off the info to the IRS. After a while with no reply, it felt like my attempts were pointless, but then maybe 18 months later I was notified and asked to come to the IRS building for an appointment in my city. The agent went over all the details, what they found in their research, and then they asked for a sworn statement. My aunt didn't declare something like $1.2 million in additional income over 5 years, and as such she owed the IRS around $420,000 plus penalties. It was all coming back to bite her in the ass, and I couldn't be happier. Her house was sold, Her vehicle sold, and they left the state. Aunt Rebecca live sheltered away in a tent in some underpass. Maybe even near you? Who knows, maybe when the IRS takes your entire life's belongings it helps you reach enlightenment?